talk about the investigation. The investigation in this matter was nothing but sloppy. It was driven by bias. Did you notice during the state's closing they didn't really even talk about the investigation? Instead, they speculated. What was in people's heads? What were they thinking? Speculation, conjecture, not proof. Instead of looking at the evidence to determine what happened, the state they determined what happened, and then they found the evidence to support it. This is confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is when you favor evidence that supports a belief and ignore evidence that contradicts it. That is how this entire case was investigated, working backwards from a conclusion. It started on March 4th. Detective Woody, before she's even entered the home, Amy Richins tells her they think Kouri is somehow involved. Then both Katie and Amy Richins tell Detective Woody they think this is because she recently found out about a trust Eric created. Immediately, this influenced this investigation. But what happened that first day? They found nothing to support foul play. Kouri tells them he was a user of THC gummies, that maybe he used one that night. They never ask where the gummies are. They do a cursory search of the bedroom and bathroom. They admit that they don't look in places where the gummies were found a month later, high up in the bathroom, high above the refrigerator, high up in the laundry room, somewhere in a pocket of either Kouri or Eric's jacket in a closet. All places where they would have been put out of reach of children. But they didn't find any of them that day. You know what else they didn't do? They didn't secure the scene. They moved things around. They told you they didn't have probable cause to search the whole house. We couldn't search the whole house. All we could do was look in the bedroom and the bathroom. But they could have asked for consent. Kouri gave them consent when they asked to search one place outside of the bedroom. The entire house could have been searched that day, but they didn't do it. They didn't even ask. What else happens that morning? Officer Nguyen, he does his death checklist. He says, did he have any history of prescription abuse? Did he have any history of illicit drug use? And what does Kouri tell him? No. How easy would it have been to just say yes? If she had just killed him with illicit drugs, why in the name of God did she just not say yes? Had she said yes, we probably wouldn't all be sitting here today. She didn't say yes because she did not know how he had died. Over the last 4 years, they've gone back to that house 10 more times. And they still can't tell you what happened the early morning of March 4th, 2022. 10 warrants, that's a lot. That's not typical. They were still searching for evidence on February 9th of this year, 2 weeks before trial. 4 years of investigation, and they are still trying to find evidence to make their case because they know they don't have enough. They're still trying to prove Kouri Richins guilty. So let's talk about Todd Gabler. In comes Todd Gabler, the private investigator. Jeff O'Driscoll told you, well, he was an investigator for the estate, just the civil case. Seriously? He's putting trackers on the car of Kouri, her mother, her brother. He's trying to track Carmen Lauber's car. He's providing evidence to the police. Detective Woody testified that this information from the private investigator is what helped advance their investigation. He testified he was in the house alone numerous times, finding things the police didn't, not using gloves, calling law enforcement when he found things. He said he didn't need a babysitter while he did all these things, which is different than what Clint Benson told you. He said nobody was ever in that house without me being there. That wasn't true. What he told you wasn't true. Todd Gabler was in and out of that house numerous times by himself. He also told you that he was completely fair and unbiased, testing two hypotheses. His hypotheses: suicide and homicide. He ignored any others, including accident. And how did he handle this unbiased testing of hypotheses? You heard Josh Grossman. He said the first time he talked to Todd Gabler said right out of the gate, "Kouri killed Eric." Josh told you that tainted what he thought of next. How does it not taint an interview when your opening line is, "Oh, Kouri killed Eric, so now let's tell me what you have, what you know"? Josh told you he started looking back at things differently than he had before because of that. Like I said, he tracked Kouri's car, he tracked her family's car, he tracked Carmen's Lauber car. He didn't track Cody Wright's car. He had more to gain from Eric's death than anyone. He didn't track anyone involved in the civil case regarding the trust. He only tracked people that he thought might lead to information for law enforcement. Did he follow up on Eric's trip to Mexico shortly before the death? No. Did he go to Mexico? Did he try and figure out where Eric had been in Sonora, Mexico? No. Nothing about that investigation was unbiased. Nothing. He passed it all on to law enforcement. And then what he did is he said to law enforcement, "You should talk to Carmen Lauber. She's on the ropes in drug court. This would be a really good time to interview her because she would be very likely to be compliant at this time." Everything about this investigation was led by the Richins family. They started on day one, and they continued until trial. They are the ones who initially hired and paid for experts. Their private investigator gave information to the police. And by the way, Gabler testified that he followed all the rules of being a private investigator. And that may very well be true. But he doesn't have to operate under the Constitution. There's a reason that we have rights under the Constitution. There is a reason that law enforcement has to get warrants to enter your home, to take electronics, to search your house. It is to protect the citizens of our country. It is to protect the innocent. Sidestepping these important constitutional rights by hiring a private investigator who then let law enforcement know what to do taints this entire investigation. And you know what? That is terrifying. It's terrifying. If someone has enough money to hire a PI, they can circumvent our constitutional rights, dig into every aspect of our rights, of our lives, and turn it over to police. We have a constitution for a reason. It's to protect us all. I want to talk about the lead investigator, Jeff O'Driscoll. Here's what he testified that his investigation consisted of. He got assigned to the case sometime in March of 2023. He got a search warrant for some medical records. He thinks he got a search warrant for a couple of cell phones. He interviewed Chelsea Barney, where they discovered that they were wrong about some text messages. Law enforcement was wrong with what they thought they were looking for. He interviewed someone named Jake Sorensen, who must not have had anything important to say because we never heard from him. Then he interviews Carmen Lauber because he was told to by the private investigator. That's it. That was the investigation. He didn't investigate any other leads. He didn't attempt to corroborate information, particularly in the letter that we saw that Kouri wrote to her mother, the walk the dog letter. Now, he told you he didn't need to corroborate that because he didn't get that letter till after Kouri was arrested. So, I guess the state was done. You wouldn't want to start looking for things that might show her innocent. You've arrested her. Interestingly, they were still executing search warrants. They were still trying to find evidence for guilt, but they weren't looking at any evidence that might show innocence. It is absolutely possible that everything she said in that letter was true. In fact, at least 3 things in that letter were corroborated by the state's own witnesses. but they didn't investigate it. Again, ignore what might contradict your theory. Confirmation bias, reasonable doubt. Also remember that letter never went to anyone. So it was nothing more than thoughts on paper. That's all that letter was. What else didn't he do? He didn't interview the person Eric was talking to in Mexico the night of his death, and we'll come back to that, but he didn't follow up on that. He said that. He didn't follow up on where Eric went in Mexico or who he was communicating with in Mexico when he was there. He didn't investigate what Eric did or where he went on February 14th, 2022. He didn't follow up to see did Eric go to the hospital that day. In fact, he did nothing regarding that day. Nothing. What else? He didn't find fentanyl anywhere. Allegedly, there were 90 to 120 pills of something. At least oxycodone. Where were they? I guess somebody took them, but they didn't have them. So whatever pills Carmen may or may not have provided to Kouri were gone. They no longer existed. They couldn't find or test those pills. And we do know that she bought oxycodone, but you know what? There was no oxycodone in Eric's stomach that night. So instead, Detective O'Driscoll says, well, we wanted to corroborate Carmen's story. I mean, we were going to corroborate it. We weren't just going to go by it. The story that they fed her. They want to corroborate the truth. They wanted to corroborate a story. Again, let's find what confirms our theory. Let's ignore what doesn't. Confirmation bias. Reasonable doubt. Sitting here in this courtroom after 4 years of investigation, there was an awful lot that O'Driscoll just could not tell you. Things he couldn't remember. He couldn't remember what people had told him in interviews. For example, he was asked, did you interview Eric's allergy doctor? Well, yes, but I can't remember what he said. Well, that might have been important because he testified the EpiPens in the house belonged to the children. Well, maybe because Eric had recently used his a couple of weeks earlier when he had an allergic reaction. He said, well, if I could have a few minutes, I could find out what was said. I could give you more information. We were in trial. He was on the stand 4 years after Eric had died. 3 years after he'd been appointed as lead investigator. And either he wasn't prepared to testify or he just didn't know. He is the lead investigator. Now the state elicited testimony from him that how could he possibly know the entire case? Is just too much. I couldn't know all of that information. But he's the one they put on. He's the one they relied on to testify about this investigation. You didn't hear from anyone else about the last 3 years of that investigation. They chose him. You know what else he couldn't testify to? He couldn't testify how the fentanyl got into Eric's system. He said, well, he ingested it. There was no evidence, none, that fentanyl was put in a drink. That was argument. Argument is not evidence, and they waited until closing to tell you, oh, she put it in a drink, without any evidence to back that up. Okay, she made him a drink that night, but that's it. She made him a drink. There's no evidence that fentanyl was in that drink. And the lead detective who couldn't tell you anything, he sat through this entire trial. He heard every witness testify. He had an opportunity to form his answers or reform his answers based on what he knew other people had said. And yet he still didn't know the evidence.